Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today we are doing another yearly ranking video. We're counting down today the top 30 albums from 1955. Okay, so a lot of the musical developments that sort of the seeds were laid for in 1954 really began to manifest themselves in 1955. At this point, rock and roll is becoming a massive deal. Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley, massive thing in this era. And Elvis Presley has now, at this point, is currently in the process of signing with RCA Victor, which becomes just a massive deal, of course. This is around the time when he absolutely explodes in popularity. And perhaps more importantly than any genre-specific developments at this point, 1955 is really the year where you start to see the 12-inch LP format become one of the dominant formats in general. There is a whole, strategy involved as far as like lowering the prices of LPs and things like that, trying to balance them out a little bit in comparison to other forms of media. More and more artists are starting to explore the LP and the length that it offers as a creative force in a way. And we really start to see evidence of that here. Even in my listening for this project, you are noticing more and more records with 40, 45, 50-minute run times as opposed to the 20 to 25-minute run times that the 10-inch format was providing before. So a lot of interesting developments here that really make, I think, 55 in general a particularly significant year in the development of the recording industry in this not nascent period, but certainly a fertile period. I also want to highlight that this year I did something a little bit different. I actually did short form reviews of every single record that I listened to for this project, which was about 90 all in all, close to 100. If you are curious about any albums that missed the cut from this list and what I thought of them, or if you want to hear me talk in perhaps more depth or perhaps in a more short form format about the records that did make this list, go ahead and check out my YouTube channel and scroll around with the different shorts and things like that. There are short form reviews for literally every single thing that I heard from this year. With that, though, the same rules apply as for the previous videos. We're only really considering studio albums as well as live albums here. Anything that is a compilation or an archival release, I'm not really considering for inclusion here. So this will rule out several really good records from this era, but the one in particular that I want to highlight is Bing Crosby's Merry Christmas. One of the great Christmas albums of all time, as many people know, as many people are aware. This is an omnipresent record, perhaps the most omnipresent record from the year 1955. It's a compilation. This is a 12-inch repackaging of a collection of songs that was originally released back in the 40s, so it could not really be justified for inclusion here, but it's stellar stuff. Chances are you know it if you grew up in a Western household that celebrated Christmas, and it absolutely would have had a pretty high spot on this list if it was included. So yeah, Bing Crosby, Merry Christmas, gotta pay my respects. And last of all, while this is a top 30 list, there were a lot of really good albums that did not end up making the cut, so I'm just going to throw out 10 honorable mentions for you. I have the self-titled record by Tony Frisella. I have Kenny Clark with Bohemia After Dark, great early showing of the Adderley Brothers, Cannonball and Nat. We'll be hearing from both of them in future videos as well. Miles Davis with Blue Moods. Really wanted to get Miles on the list proper, couldn't quite do it this year, but Blue Moods, really interesting record and absolutely worth checking out. Aside from that, I have Dexter Gordon with Dexter Blows Hot and Cool, really good record from the sax master himself. Ahmad Jamal with Ahmad Jamal Plays, really good debut record from Jamal here. The Lorinda Almeida Quartet featuring Bud Shank. If you like your Brazilian acoustic music mixed with jazz, this proto-bossa nova stuff, check that record out. And I also have the Oklahoma soundtrack as well. Really easy to lose sight of how revolutionary the musical Oklahoma was, but this soundtrack here, which is the motion picture soundtrack, I should say, is really interesting. I think really engaging out of context and worth checking out. And then the last honorable mentions I have are Tony Bennett with Cloud 7, just missing the cut. Luis Gonzaga with A Historia do Nordeste, great Brazilian music, kind of, again, not quite field recordings necessarily, but great showcase of northeastern Brazilian folk music from this era, worth checking out for sure. And just missing the list proper, the self-titled record by the Hank Mobley Quartet, another stellar debut from this era. Mobley sounds great already, so if you like his stuff, haven't checked out his early records, this is one to listen to for sure. But with all that mentioned, let's go ahead and get right into the top 30. And starting off our list at number 30, I have Oscar Peterson with Plays Harold Arlen, released on Clef. Oscar Peterson, my main man, he is just a model of consistency in this era. And in that sense, it becomes difficult to sometimes parse out the strengths of one record versus another. But I think the Harold Arlen record from this era stands out a little bit because I think it's a particularly fine mixture of composer and performer here. I think Arlen as a songwriter, there's just so much life to these songs. Arlen, truly one of the great American songbook composers. So tracks like Accentuate the Positive, It's Only a Paper Moon, Blues in the Night, Over the Rainbow, just so much life in the melodies that Peterson is able to play around with and make lighter or make darker when needed. And it just works really, really effectively. Again, it's hard to go wrong with any Oscar Peterson from this era, and we actually will be coming back to him a little bit later on in this list. But as far as the quote-unquote songbook records here, if you will, this is one of the best and potentially might be my favorite of the lot. Oscar Peterson, Plays Harold Arlen, number 30. Number 29, I have Billie Holiday with Music for Torching. Billie Holiday in this era is a really interesting study. You know, this is before the final, I suppose, breakdown of her health and her career. But you can definitely hear the age in her vocals and the kind of weathered nature of it a little bit in really interesting ways. I think the ensemble on this record is really good. Sweets Edison, Barney Kessel, really major parts of kind of driving these songs and, again, conveying both the energy and the beauty of them in really interesting ways. I think that Come Rain or Come Shine, to use another Harold Arlen song here, I think is one where you really hear the weathered side of her voice in a very nice and convincing context. And I think there's plenty of other great tracks. I Don't Want to Cry Anymore, I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You. I Get a Kick Out of You on the second side, has some really great drumming on it. It's not a career highlight from Billie Holiday, and if you watch my Billie Holiday ranking video, you'll know that. I think this is probably mid-pack as far as her LPs go, but I do think that this speaks to the really high bar of quality that especially this era of Billie will enter in. The LP era of Billie Holiday, I think, is consistently really, really strong. And this is certainly leading into that era, even if it's not one of her absolute strongest efforts, in my opinion. Music for Torching, Billie Holiday, my number 29. At number 28, I have the Modern Jazz Quartet with Concord, released on Prestige. I'm interested to see how many times the Modern Jazz Quartet features on these lists, because I've heard a number of their records, and beforehand, I never really would have considered myself a major fan of theirs. Their sound is very vibes heavy in both the literal sense and in the descriptive aesthetic sense, I suppose. And in that way, it can sound a little bit like the ancestor to what we would now consider to be like elevator music and that sort of thing. It doesn't feel groundbreaking when you listen to it. Now, that said, this is one of the more important records and one of the more important eras of their career. They will move on from Prestige after this record, and at this point now they have Connie Kay as their drummer, who will at this point complete the classic lineup of the quartet that will go on to release a bunch of stuff with Atlantic over the coming about 20 years or so, I think. And the combination here really, really works. I feel like I want to sit more with these records to really appreciate, I think, John Lewis as a composer and as an arranger, because I know that's one of the main selling points of this group. But I think the ensemble as a whole works really, really well here. I like how Lewis and Milt Jackson on the vibraphone really kind of bounce off of each other in a really interesting way. Several great songs, as I said. I love the rendition of Ralph's New Blues. I think that one's excellent. I'll Remember April is really good. And I think Softly as in a Morning Sunrise on the second side is another highlight. But a really consistent record, really good, and really accessible too, in that sense. If you're someone who maybe struggles with straightforward bop music, I don't think you can really go wrong with this thing. It's a lot safer in an immediate sense, I suppose. But I also think it's immensely pleasurable and immensely valid too. So I don't mean to slag this record off in any particular way. And I'm excited to check out more of their stuff going forward. The Modern Jazz Quartet, Concord, my number 28. At number 27, I have Sammy Davis Jr. with Starring Sammy Davis Jr., released on Decca. Debut record from Sammy Davis Jr. and a very commercially successful record from this era. And Davis, to me, out of the crooners, is a very unique bird in his talent set. While he hung around with like your Sinatras and your Dean Martins and things like that, I think in many ways Davis had the most natural entertaining ability out of the whole lot of them. I don't know if I would say he was the best natural singer. I don't know that I would say he was naturally the best comedian, but I think he had a way of combining all of those, plus a dramatic sensibility as well, that really, really works. And you see that in droves on this record. He's a really unique vocal stylist in general, very technically proficient, but also prone to exaggerating for comic effect and things like that, and does parodies of different styles and singers. The track Because of You on here, where he's doing a bunch of different interpretations of like 10 different vocalists and things like that. It's pretty bonkers. I think it's just an absolute tour de force run through of what I would imagine Davis's stage act must have been from this era. It must have been a sight to see him perform in Vegas or the club scene or what have you. And in that sense, I think that's what boosts it for me a little bit. Not a record I think I'm going to put on replay very often compared to a lot of other vocal jazz records from this era, but really impressive in a lot of ways. And one of the records from 55 that kind of left me not in awe after listening to it, but extremely impressed. Extremely, extremely impressive album and performances. Starring Sammy Davis Jr., my number 27. At number 26, I have Hampton Hawes with Trio Volume 1, released on Contemporary. A piano trio record, Hawes on the piano, Red Mitchell on the bass, Chuck Thompson on the drums. And I think there's a really distinctive quality. You know, I've heard quite a few piano trio records from 1955 and from this era in general. And I think what separates Hawes from some of the other trios, like Oscar Peterson, to use one example, is that he has a fire to his playing, I think, here. A real aggressive sensibility that I think comes through quite clearly. Tracks like I Got Rhythm, which I think starts everything off on a brilliant note. Tracks like Blues the Most, Feelin' Fine is excellent. Hamp's Blues, All the Things You Are. The rendition of These Foolish Things here, I think, is really cool. You get melody in the bass, which we love when that happens in a jazz record for sure. It stood out a bit more to me than I think some of the other trio albums, in large part because of Hawes's playing, but I think the arrangements too were creative at points. So definitely, if you're looking for that vibe, but looking for something a little bit different, I would find it hard to go wrong with this one. Hampton Hawes Trio Volume 1, really good record, and my number 26. At number 25, I have Stan Getz with West Coast Jazz, released on Norgran. So despite the name, I think it's worth knowing and worth noting that Stan Getz is not a West Coast jazz musician. He's very much from the East Coast tradition in many senses. However, this record was tracked, I believe, in the summer of 55, while Getz was in California filming the Benny Goodman Story, a popular musical film from that era. And so he's doing these sessions with West Coast jazz musicians, and it's a very interesting blend of styles. I think that Getz matched up with these players like Conte Candoli on the trumpet, Lou Levy on the piano, Shelly Manne on the drums, people who are pretty solid mainstays of the West Coast scene. It really, really works. And it's hard for me to say if Getz really melds into their style as much as they feel like they meld into his. Like, I think Candoli in particular really plays some great trumpet licks that rank up with some of the better bop stuff you'll hear from this year. Plenty of great standards like Summertime, tracks like A Night in Tunisia, which I feel like I've heard probably 10 different versions of that song from 1955. Very popular track to be recorded at around that time. And yeah, just a really solid fusion of styles that feels natural and doesn't feel like anybody's a fish out of water, which is a complete testament to the playing ability of everybody involved. Stan Getz, West Coast Jazz, my number 25. At number 24, I have Helen Merrill with Strings, released on MRC. Second record by Helen Merrill, and for her first record, Stay Tuned. But while I don't like this one quite as much as her debut record, I think there's still a lot to really enjoy here. And I think, as opposed to her first record, where I think her voice is part of what is successful, but not the main thing driving it, I do think her voice is a bit more of a standout piece here. And it feels like we really get to hear the strengths of Merrill as a vocalist here, that very kind of, not uber husky tone. I mean, we will get to some vocalists with true husky voices in the future, but how it works in that realm but doesn't go over the top, and there's a real sense of warmth to her voice at points as well. I think some of the arrangements on here are absolutely terrific. Mountain High, Valley Low, I think, is one of the best vocal jazz tracks of the year, in large part because of how striking the string arrangement is. Her rendition of Lilac Wine, I think, is superb as well. The Masquerade is Over, Spring Will Be a Little Late This Year. Some really, really strong tracks on here. And one of the more successful examples so far anyways of a such and such person with strings record really, really working and really shining through. So Helen Merrill with Strings, not as acclaimed as her debut record, and perhaps understandably, but I think really underrated and really worth a shot. At number 23, I have the self-titled collaborative record by Lee Konitz with Warren Marsh, released on Atlantic. Great collaborative record from the Konitz, the alto saxophonist, Marsh, the tenor saxophonist, playing on top of a trio accompanying them. And if you like saxophones in jazz music, I think you're really, really going to dig this. It's just so remarkable how well these two managed to stay in sync in these, bop or bop adjacent tunes. You have moments like the track Donna Lee on here is one example where there's a lot of like fast breaks in that song. I'm thinking especially towards like the middle and the end are the ones that jump out to me, where they're playing in almost perfect unison. And it's just amazing how much their phrasing and their figuration and their tone just match each other so well. And they do this several times throughout the record, whether that's in perfect unison, whether that's in harmony with each other, but in like exact synchronized rhythm. And it's really, really fantastic stuff. Have to shout out as well in my notes the pianist Sal Mosca, because they do have a few other players. They do have pianists come in for most of the songs anyways. Sal Mosca has a great piano break in the track Don't Squawk as well. Really excellent stuff. But yeah, really strong ensemble and just really, really great lead playing. If you like the saxophone, this is an album for you. Lee Konitz with Warren Marsh. Yeah, sax rule. At number 22, I have Errol Garner with Solitaire, released on Mercury. Errol Garner, I've talked several times about him on this channel before, and you're going to hear me talk about him a couple more times before this video is out. Such an underrated piano player, and he shows this off so many times this year, and so many times even just on this record. As the name might indicate, this is an entirely solo performance from Garner. This is it. It is him. And as a result, you get to see his technical, virtuoso playing style just in high definition right in front of you. He's really just playing along with these melodies and playing around with tempos and dynamics and things like that with complete carte blanche. He can do whatever the hell he wants, and it's brilliant. It's fascinating stuff. I think I'll Never Smile Again. The opening track is really excellent. It's the Talk of the Town is excellent. I like A Cottage for Sale and Over the Rainbow, which he extends to 10.5 minutes and doesn't to me feel its length in the slightest. Just brilliant solo piano work. And while maybe it's not the most complete Garner record for my money, just stylistically, or like you don't get quite the full sonic palette that you do on other records, boy, you're not going to find many better examples of him just as a player, as a technician. So Solitaire by Errol Garner, my number 22, great stuff. At number 21, I have J.J. Johnson with The Eminent J.J. Johnson Volume 2, released on Blue Note. Once again, J.J. Johnson coming back with a strong-ass record and great trombone-focused jazz. I think that a lot of the strengths of the first Eminent J.J. Johnson record, which I rated pretty highly in 1954, are still apparent here. You have Johnson himself just doing brilliant things with some of these melodies, like on the opening track, Jay is excellent, and Old Devil Moon, I think, is great. Wynton Kelly on the piano is a great backing, along with the great Charles Mingus on the bass, Kenny Clark on the drums, just so many highlights here. And, you know, straightforward bop music, but again, with the unique twist of you don't find too many bop records that are led by a trombone player. And that in and of itself is worth plenty of intrigue. Not a whole lot else to say about it. Again, as I said, a lot of the strengths from the first record are here in the second. So if you enjoyed the first, you'll enjoy the second. Eminent J.J. Johnson Volume 2, great bop album. At number 20, I have Chet Baker with Chet Baker Sings and Plays with Bud Shank, Russ Freeman, and Strings, released on Pacific Jazz. Second of the Chet Baker Sings records, I suppose. And this time around, the ensemble that he's playing with here is a lot fuller. There's a lot more going on than the first record, which is fairly intimate. And ultimately, does it work to its benefit? I don't know. Clearly, I don't enjoy this record quite as much as the first one, but I do think it has its own value. There are still more sections where instrumentalists can come in to solo and things like that and fill in holes in the arrangements. And some of the arrangements are really, really great, like the track Grey December, which has this like minor key string arrangement that's really, really dark and really, really cool. Someone to Watch Over Me feels, in this context especially, like a very self-aware play on the appeal of the previous record. I find that really interesting and fascinating. It's interesting to think about the marketability of Chet Baker and how Pacific Jazz kind of advertised him, put him out there as kind of a dual threat at this point. It's not a perfect album. I think the up-tempo stuff on here, like I Remember You, is not very successful. I don't think it works very well for Baker as a singer. It just puts him out of his comfort zone and shines a spotlight on technical skills that he doesn't really have yet. But still, really enjoyable stuff. And again, I like some of what the Fuller Ensemble adds for sure. So in that sense, it's worthwhile if you like the first Chet Baker Sings record. This one comes in, however, at my number 20. At number 19, I have the Chico Hamilton Quintet with the Chico Hamilton Quintet featuring Buddy Collette. Really cool album. I was familiar with one Chico Hamilton record going in, Gongs East, from a few years later. But this one is really interesting and I think different in a number of ways. This is very, very much cool jazz, but with a romantic bend to it. And I mean that in the classical sense, romantic era. And so much of that is due to Buddy Collette as a wind player who plays a bunch of different wind instruments on here and sounds absolutely terrific. And then Fred Katz on the cello. And really, I think it is those lower string parts and the expressiveness there that brings to mind the classical influence in these arrangements. And when you combine these two with the backing instrumentation here of Jim Hall, amazing guitarist who we'll talk about in future videos for sure, Carson Smith on the bass, and then Chico Hamilton himself on the drums, very brush heavy patterns that he's doing on the drums and the cymbals and things like that. It just gives this lightness to everything and allows so much room for expression here. And I loved the first half of this record, especially, quite a bit. The second half kind of switches up. It's actually a live set that strips the arrangements back into a much more kind of straightforward format, which to me is less engaging. It sounds a little bit more typical, I suppose, and doesn't serve the ensemble sound quite as well, but it's still solid at least. That said, though, if you're going to check out this record, I would at least recommend, like if you're hesitant in any way, check out the first side. I think the first side is truly transcendent stuff, some of the best jazz music of the year, and everything else is nothing to sneeze at either. Chico Hamilton Quintet featuring Buddy Collette, my number 19. At number 18, I have Mahalia Jackson with The World's Greatest Gospel Singer, released on Columbia. There's not a whole lot else to say beyond the title here, really. Mahalia Jackson, maybe not an albums artist in the way that we traditionally know her. This is a little bit later on in her career, after she had already recorded a bunch of sides for previous labels, but you still get the strengths and the core of what makes her such a successful and such a powerful singer, in the sense that there's just such a sense of dynamics in what she's doing and such a sense of passion. It feels like she means what she's saying. And that's really the beauty of it all. Lots of great tracks. I'm Going to Live the Life I Sing About in my song. I Will Move On Up a Little Higher, Out of the Depths. Keep Your Hand on the Plow might be my favorite on here. That record, I think in particular, leans into more bluesier elements, which is interesting. And I think you really, really hear how dynamic and how much vocal control she has here, how dynamic her voice is. And I really appreciate that. So I don't know if this is like a starting point for Mahalia Jackson necessarily. You're still probably better off like with a singles collection than this specific record, but not a bad place to start off by any means, I don't think. You still hear the core of what makes her a really transcendent vocalist and a transcendent artist. Mahalia Jackson, the world's greatest gospel singer. Yes, she is. At number 17, I have Hazel Scott with Relaxed Piano Moods, released on debut. Hazel Scott, you're probably familiar with her, if anything, from some of like the videos of her playing and things like that. There's one from a particular film, the name of which I can't think of, that goes viral on social media semi-frequently. And yeah, brilliant pianist. And you really hear that here. Compared even to some of the other trio records from this era, there's nothing in the way of frills or extracurricular things going on here. This is just intimate. She is such a tasteful performer in how she approaches this setting, and she is uplifted by a remarkable ensemble in Charles Mingus and Max Roach. And granted, like the name value there, I think, is higher than what they offer tangibly. You're not necessarily going to hear this music, these recordings, and think, oh, this is clearly Mingus on the bass, this is clearly Roach on the drums. But I think it speaks to the musical sensibilities involved, because we have the context of what they have done at this point and what they will go on to do. And really, again, on top of that, it's just a star-studded lineup just on its face, which makes it an interesting curiosity. Plenty of terrific tracks. I think like Someone in Love and Peace of Mind are both beautiful. Get Up From There is one of the more up-tempo things on here. And you can really hear the energy on this track. You can hear like Scott like yelling at the band to, pick up the tempo, or just encouraging them to keep going and that sort of thing. That's really engaging. I like A Foggy Day a lot as the closer. Just a really lovely album, and an album that showcases Scott as a piano player in so many great ways. She's probably not a figure we're going to see a whole lot else of in these videos, unfortunately, but really glad to recommend this particular one. And definitely, I think it is worth checking out. If you check one piano trio record from this list, maybe make it this one. At number 16, I have Dinah Washington with For Those in Love, released on MRC. Second record from Dinah Washington, and if you watch my 54 video, you know how much I loved her debut. And this is still great. Compared to her debut, this is a much more ballads-focused record. It has a bit more of a lane that it tends to stick to stylistically, but there's still a lot to love. And again, so much of it is just Washington as a singer. There's so much versatility in what she's doing. She has such unbelievable control of her voice, of her expressions, and everything in between, that it just makes it captivating. I get a kick out of You. The opening track is terrific. Blue Gardenia is one that stood out to me. I think the way she like phrases the titular line, that's what caught my ear. If you listen to this record and listen to that song and listen how she, kind of breaks up the syllables and how much emphasis she puts on each one and how much she sustains each one on that titular line, like it's so deeply intentional, and there's so much interesting like breath control going on there. It just, I could geek out about this record and about that song for ages. Lots of brilliant ballad tracks on here. Again, a little bit more one-dimensional than her first record, but a lot of the same compliments as far as what she's doing vocally. She has a great ensemble behind her too, which I think helps. And yeah, it's excellent stuff. Dinah Washington, For Those in Love, no sophomore slump here at all. Excellent record, and it comes in at my number 16. At number 15, I have Buddy DeFranco and Oscar Peterson with Buddy DeFranco and Oscar Peterson Play George Gershwin, released on Norgran. So I mentioned that Oscar Peterson would come back, and here he is. But this is very different from any of the other records that we have talked about in relation to Oscar Peterson, and literally any of the other records that he's made to this point. Buddy DeFranco is a true band leader in the Duke Ellington mode in a way. And the arrangements here are very much big band and like pseudo progressive big band type of stuff. You have these very large ornate arrangements mixed with moments that feel more stripped back and more stripped down to the essence of like what jazz music was doing in the 50s, elements and individual tracks that feel more bop oriented, I suppose. And you don't hear Oscar Peterson do a lot of like bop stuff in this part of his career anyways. And so you get some really great moments like So Wonderful, where there's multiple different modes, multiple different sections going on in the same track. You have moments where Peterson is just blistering his ass off with these solos and just doing a brilliant job. It's super engaging. It carves out and spotlights a different side of Peterson's playing that you don't get to hear as much in his solo stuff. Sometimes you have like a little bit of the too many strings padding everything critique that is present on a few records from this year for my personal money. But you then have tracks like I Got Rhythm, which, the strings that are there, even if they are present as padding, it doesn't really matter because DeFranco on the clarinet and Peterson on the piano are just trading off licks left and right, and it's just super engaging. So yeah, I was surprised at what this record was when I listened to it. I wasn't surprised that I enjoyed it, but I wasn't expecting it sonically to be what it ended up being. So in that sense, I guess that was a plus. And it's a record, again, that I would highly recommend. Buddy DeFranco, Oscar Peterson, George Gershwin, brilliant stuff. At number 14, I have the collaborative record by Max Roach, Herb Geller, Walter Benton, Joe Maini, and Clifford Brown, Best Coast Jazz, released on MRC. It's Brown and Roach again. And again, if you saw my 1954 video, you know exactly what I think of when I hear that Brown and Roach are collaborating in any particular way. And it's really cool to hear, in this case, that duo playing with a different ensemble than what they were doing on the self-titled record and what they were also doing on the other records they put out this year. The other distinction about this album, too, is that there's only one song per side here, each song coming in at over 15 minutes in length. You have Coronado on the A side, you go to My Head on the B side. And I like this different structure here. I like what it allows the musicians to do that the other Brown and Roach records don't as much, because there's more songs, so less runtime. The soloists are playing around so much on here. You get multiple moments where like one soloist will do a turn, one or two others will have their turns on kind of shredding, and then the original soloist, whether that's Brown, whether that's Herb Geller, whoever that might be, they get another chance to shine here. So it's really cool. And I don't I don't think it's a highlight of the Brown and Roach stuff, and you'll see why, because there's a couple other records they put out in 1955 that I have ranked above this, but still high-end playing, some of the highest end playing of this era when it comes to bop music. Just maybe one of those records where you listen to it after you listen to the other Brown and Roach stuff, and that's entirely because of how essential the other stuff is. Best Coast Jazz, my number 14. Great stuff. At number 13, I have Errol Garner with Contrasts, released on MRC. I said just a little bit ago that if you had one piano trio record that you wanted to check out from 1955, it should be that Hazel Scott record, Relaxed Piano Moods. Well, I'm going to take that back, because this record exists too. As I said, Errol Garner, brilliant, underrated piano player from this era. And once again, we have a record here that is just super evocative, deeply technical. You have very beautiful moments on here, but you also have real kind of barn burners that are really just a lot of fun. Like 7-Eleven Jump, I think, is one that stands out to me here. Love it when he's engaging with his bluesier side, like on Part-Time Blues and things like that. But you also get, again, the mellower moments and the ballads and stuff where you get to hear his romantic, impressionistic side leaping out at you. Nothing better on here than the penultimate track, Misty, which I think is one of his best recordings just in general. I think it's so beautiful, so lovely, so expressive, and all the other things. And yeah, well worth your time. A lot of the same strengths as his self-titled record from a couple of years earlier, which I was also very high on. So if you like that record, you will almost certainly enjoy Contrasts. Contrast is my number 13 on here, and yet it's not my top Errol Garner pick from 1955, so stay tuned. At number 12, I have Carmen McRae with By Special Request, released on Decca. Carmen McRae, another great vocal jazz singer from this era, and she put out 2 records in 55. She put out a self-titled record as well, which I didn't like quite as much. I thought it was very good, but not necessarily enough to crack even my honorable mentions list this year, although it came very close. But this one I like quite a bit more. I think, whereas her voice, I think, sounds really good in the debut album, here it sounds terrific. And maybe that's a product of her first record was recorded with a different label. It was put out on Bethlehem. So, you know, she's putting this out on Decca, so obviously a higher production value going into this. But man, such an expressive singer, really just great sound. And again, very much like we talked about with Dinah Washington, great tonal control. I don't think their voices are identical, to be clear. I don't think McRae has like the natural grit that Washington can exude in her performances, but McRae sounds terrific here, and the arrangements behind her are really just so good at giving her space to work in a way that, again, the debut record is not. The track that I highlight here is Something to Live For. I think that one is fantastic. Just, again, it all comes down to the phrasing of her voice. Love her vibrato on that track and how much she's able to balance weight and lightness in her singing tone. That's a very difficult thing to do because, again, that involves breath control and understanding the song and understanding the moment that you are in actively at every second. And she does an amazing job here. So really excited to, much like Dinah, explore Carmen McRae's catalog a little bit more throughout this process. And I'm fairly certain that we have not seen the last of her on these lists. Carmen McRae, By Special Request, my number 12. At number 11, I have Dizzy Gillespie and Stan Getz with Diz and Getz, released on Norgran. This is one of the best bop records of the year. I would say it's the best bop record of the year, not involving Max Roach or Clifford Brown in any capacity. But one, that's not quite true. And number 2, Max Roach is the drummer here, so it doesn't really matter. The core of this is Gillespie and Getz, of course, 2 fantastic players. Gillespie I talked about in the last video, Getz I talked about earlier in this video, and the Oscar Peterson trio was backing them, so it's just a who's who. It's a star-studded show here, and we all love that. And it's just really great bop music, and that's what it comes down to. Gillespie is superb on here. The opening track, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. I mean, the mute trumpet work that he's doing on here is absolutely terrific. I think Impromptu is really excellent as well. You do have lots of mellower moments, so it's a balanced record, and it understands dynamism, and it understands how to, you know, go back and forth between tunes. So it's not just, you know, upbeat stuff after upbeat stuff. And while Gillespie, I might argue, is the star of the show, I still think Getz is in top form here as well. Some of the best playing of his career, actually, I think, comes on this record because he is trying to keep up with Gillespie here. So it's really engaging, it's really entertaining, and it's just great bop music, and that's all you have to say about it, really. Dizzy Gillespie, Stan Getz, superb stuff. Just missing my top 10 at number 11. At number 10, I have Kenny Dorham with Afro-Cuban, released on Blue Note. Terrific album. So similar in pretense, perhaps, to the Dizzy Gillespie record, Afro, from the previous year. The big distinction here is Gillespie's Afro is this through-composed, very ornate piece, or at least a good chunk of it is, and it predominantly showcases Gillespie as a composer. Afro-Cuban here is a lot more just straight up bop music with an Afro-Cuban sheen over it, mainly thanks to Carlos Valdez on the conga, balancing out with Art Blakey on the drums, doing a lot of great kind of pseudo-Latin rhythmic patterns on like the ride cymbal and things like that. And yeah, it's excellent and really engaging in that sense. But as I said, I think, you know, apart from the percussion, which is undeniable and clearly a highlight of this record, more than anything else, this is just a fantastic bit of bop music. And if you haven't checked out the 12-inch version, because this is really the 10-inch version that I'm rating, the 12-inch version is worth your time too, because you hear even more sessions with a lot of the same players, and it doesn't have that same like Afro-Cuban sheen over it necessarily. And in that sense, maybe it stands out less, but it's still just terrific bop music overall. Still great soloing. Again, as I said, the lineup is superb. When you have Kenny Dorham, one of the great, arguably very underrated trumpet players. I think a lot of people file him under the second tier category from this era, and I think that's definitely downplaying his importance. J.J. Johnson, Hank Mobley, Horace Silver, Oscar Pettiford, all on here. Cecil Payne, can't forget him. Just a superb lineup playing superb bop music and having that extra little flair, I suppose, that little veneer on the surface of everything, makes this record, I think, sonically stand out more than a lot of the other bop efforts. And I think there's something to be said for the importance of that. So Kenny Dorham, Afro-Cuban, really great record, important record too, I think, very much, and a very deserving top 10 album for me, coming in at my number 10. At number 9, I have Dinah Washington with Dinah Jams, released on MRC. Again, talking about live records from this era, we have a couple of them being represented up here in the top 10, and yeah, this one is superb. It's absolutely fantastic. And in this case, it's not even like Dinah's first studio record where like her voice is the star of the show and is just absolutely flooring you in every second of the way. Here, it's very much Washington being accompanied and matching up with, and in some cases, ceding the floor to a really great backing ensemble, led, of course, by Clifford Brown and Max Roach. And get ready to hear those names a lot in this top 10, because Brown and Roach are everywhere here. Just a superb bit of playing. You have tracks like the opening track, Lover Come Back to Me, and the closing track, You Go to My Head. Both of these are these very like long jam sessions, 10, 11 minutes long, and they are great exercises in allowing Washington to steal the show and do her vocal runs and her just really wild phrasing, but also allowing the players on here to just go ballistic as well. And so in that sense, it feels like vocal jazz as jazz in a very pure sense and a very engaging sense. And Washington is on fire here. Some of the best vocals probably of her career. Really superb stuff here. Clifford Brown, in turn, I think has one of his best slower moments as a soloist on the track Summertime here. I think the kind of vibrato and the register shifts that he's doing here are just sublime, unreal. Yeah, it's engaging. It's so energetic, so, again, demonstrative of a bunch of people who are at their creative primes. This was recorded around the same time as the first Brown and Roach record as well. So, I mean, just such a fertile period, technically and in every other possible sense for so many of these musicians. And if you care about any of them, if you care about listening to them in different contexts, then you need to hear this record if you haven't. Dinah Washington, Dinah Jams, terrific record, terrific live album, and it is my number 9. At number 8, I have Clifford Brown and Max Roach with Brown and Roach Incorporated, released on MRC. This record is made up of extras from the same sessions that produced the first Brown and Roach record, so you don't need me to tell you that the playing is absolutely top shelf stuff there, just as it was here, or vice versa, I should say. It's brilliant stuff. I don't like it quite as much, and I don't really have a great rationale for it, just that maybe the track listing on here is a little bit weaker, perhaps song to song, which is not saying a whole lot, because you still have tracks like Sweet Clifford and I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You that are absolutely terrific stuff. The former in particular has a great like Max Roach solo, and I love when he gets to solo on these records. You have Richie Powell taking a solo turn and I'll String Along With You, which is really good. Maybe part of what jumps out to me a little bit on here is that Harold Land is a lot more in the background compared to the first record. He does get a great turn on the track Darn That Dream on the second side, but yeah, he's actually completely absent for a couple songs here. So, you know, it's terrific stuff. It's terrific hard bop music, clearly one of the best records in that milieu from the era. And again, I think, you know, there are collections that Brown and Roach released together that are superior from a song-to-song standpoint. But I think ultimately, and I said this in the last video, I'm pretty sure, alluded to this probably being the case, every single release that the two of them did together is essential listening for those of you interested in bop music in this era of jazz music. Superb stuff. Brown and Roach Incorporated, not my favorite record of theirs, in general, or from 1955, but highly worth checking out, and it comes in at my number 8. At number 7, I have the self-titled record by Helen Merrill, released on MRC. Keep throwing out the name MRC, and I'm going to throw out the name Clifford Brown once again here, because he is on this record, and does a terrific job again. As I said in my review of Helen Merrill with Strings earlier in this video, I think Merrill's voice in that record, her second LP, is much more of a clear standout than it is on this record. Well, the fact that you know that Clifford Brown is on this record will tell you exactly why. Merrill is, you know, in a sense, I don't want to say fighting with a really strong ensemble, because that's not the way to frame it, but she is very much performing with an ensemble of really high quality players. And in that sense, someone who, you know, from Merrill's standpoint, I don't think is a top shelf jazz vocalist. I think she's very good and borderline great, but I don't think she's elite necessarily. She's at risk of being overshadowed, and I think she probably is at points. But the whole, I think, is greater than the sum of its parts here. It all works as one collective whole. And maybe you can give credit to the 21-year-old Quincy Jones, who arranged this music and conducted it. And, you know, certainly I think the arrangements are a big piece of it, but I think you have to give credit to the players. You have to give credit to Clifford Brown, who, you know, it must be said, is not really restraining himself here either. There's tracks like What's New, where he just is absolutely going haywire on the solos. And it's also a credit to Helen Merrill as a vocalist, where I think she just naturally sits in with the group. I think to an extent, the restraint that you hear on this record is intentional, and it's her melding in with the performers to create the best, again, collective whole here. And really, again, she does have some standout moments like Falling in Love with Love. She has some great phrasing on that track, for instance. It's brilliant. Again, it's vocal jazz. And while I don't think that the vocal part of this record compared to, let's say, Dinah Washington or some of the other records that we'll talk about later, I don't think the vocalist is the clear highlight here. But boy, it's a very comfortable, enjoyable, lovely package as a collective thing. And in that sense, I love it. I really, really love it. And it couldn't be any lower than this. Helen Merrill's self-titled record, my number 7. Check it out if you haven't. At number 6, I have Louis Armstrong with Satch Plays Fats, a tribute to the immortal Fats Waller, released on Columbia. So I don't like this record quite as much as the W.C. Handy record from '54, which, again, if you watch that video, you know just how much I love that record. But I do think there are some strengths that set this one apart in a positive way overall. This is a breezier set. I think the W.C. Handy record, there are some tracks that are very clearly a little bit more larger scale, experimental maybe is the right word for it, just bigger picture compositions and arrangements that feel like Armstrong is trying to prove something. And this just feels like he's just jamming out, basically. A lot of these tracks are among Fats Waller's most famous, like Honeysuckle Rose, I'm Crazy About My Baby, Ain't Misbehavin', and all just terrific songs. I think they all work really, really well. I think Ain't Misbehavin' in particular, you get to hear Armstrong just cutting loose on the trumpet, which is always really fun. I'm also partial to All That Meat and No Potatoes. I think, again, that's where Armstrong's more humorous side comes out, and I always love when that happens. A lot of the same players from the W.C. Handy record are on here, so it's very much a comparable quality playing-wise. And yeah, it's really strong stuff. Again, doesn't leave as much of the indelible impression as W.C. Handy, but it's still an excellent record. It's still superbly played with great musicians, and the core material is really strong. So, Satch Plays Fats, Louis Armstrong, my number 6. At number 5, I have Julie London with Julie Is Her Name, released on Liberty. Debut record from Julie London, and yeah, definitely one of the best vocal jazz records of the year. One of the most famous vocal jazz records of the year, for sure. This is the album that, when people think of Julie London, people think of this album. And what sets this one apart, because I do think this stands very apart from every other vocal jazz record from this era, or from this year, even if it's not my absolute favorite. What sets it apart is the intimacy of it. London's voice is so husky, so low, and carries so much weight about it that it can make a room go silent in and of itself. So when you have a voice like that combined with a very capable but very soft ensemble here, Barney Kessel on the guitar, Ray Leatherwood on the bass, you have a record that has a lot of natural space to it and a lot of natural atmosphere, and not a lot of players who are making an effort to fill that up. And I think they do a good job as a trio, but you're still left with something that seems very quiet, very sensitive, and at times perhaps even sensual. And I think it carves out that unique lane and does so really, really effectively. I think there's a lot of terrific tracks on here. Cry Me a River is the famous one that's become one of London's signature songs. And I think that makes sense because it also feels like the most complete thing on the record. A lot of these songs are actually like pretty short, 2 to 2.5 minutes, some of them not even 2 minutes long, which maybe is the one thing that holds me back from loving these tracks even more, is that sometimes the arrangements don't feel entirely as fleshed out as they could be, but that's nitpicking here. Shout out as well to the track Laura, specifically that like a cappella bit at the beginning of the track where, again, it's just London's voice. And again, it goes back to what I was saying. Her voice can fill a room and can fill a sonic landscape very convincingly, which I think is just so awesome. So great. It's a superb album. Chances are you've probably heard it. Again, it's one of the more recognizable albums from 1955. but a record I'm happy to have revisited and happy to give some kind of attention to here. It's definitely, again, a singular record for the era without a doubt. And Julia's Her Name comes in at my number 5. At number 4, I have Clifford Brown and Max Roach with Study in Brown, released on MRC. Again, Brown and Roach. This is, as I said, this is the record that I have above Brown and Roach Incorporated. I do like this better for sure. This is, I think, as good in many respects as the self-titled record, if not, better than it on some levels. I think the distinction between this album, which was recorded like 6 months after the self-titled record, was the distinction between this one and the self-titled is, I think the self-titled is very intense. I think it hits you right away with how strong and powerful the ensemble playing is. And Study in Brown works, I think, because while it doesn't have that same intensity, it has a little bit more diversity in material and feel. The tracks feel like they have their own unique identity at points, which is really interesting. It also helps that they have the track Cherokee opening it up, which may be the best Brown and Roach song. Hard to pick just one, but that might be it. The opening riff is just so pronounced. It just thrusts you into the meat of the album right away. And the solo turn that Brown does here is pretty famous, one of his most well-known solos, if not his most well-known, and a pretty standard bit of repertoire for jazz musicians in general, if I'm not mistaken. So a superb recording to start things off, and it never really lets up from there. Jackie is excellent, swinging is great. Land's End, again, Brown and Harold Land complementing each other extremely well on here. I love the track George's Dilemma. I think the kind of pseudo-Latin ride pattern that Roach does here is really, really striking. I think Take the A Train is a really excellent way to end the record. Again, there feels like a little bit more character to this thing that, in describing it in that sense, makes me understand why people, a good bit of people, I think, believe that this is the definitive Brown and Roach album. Again, for my money, I don't know. It's hard to deny the first impression that the debut record leaves. And so in that sense, I might be a bit more inclined to lean towards that one. But it's, comparing apples to apples, equally high quality apples to each other at this point. Study in Brown is excellent. It is the best hard bop record from the year 1955, in my opinion, and highly worth checking out. Essential jazz music for sure for those who have not checked it out yet. Study in Brown, my number 4. At number 3, I have Errol Garner with Concert by the Sea, released on Columbia. It's hard to know what to say because I've already raved about Errol Garner in 2 of the records on my top 30 now, and now I have a third entry from him here, which is pretty wild. But I've not heard every single Errol Garner album, but I feel okay making this declaration without having heard every Garner record. This is his definitive statement. I think if there's one album where if you want to point to Errol Garner and say, start here, because this is the most essential stuff and this is maybe the most representative of him as a player, I think it's this one. It has every facet, much like Contrasts does that we talked about earlier. It has every facet of his playing. The slower moments, the more fast-paced, frenetic moments, every single thing that made him such a unique and distinct player, but now in a live setting. And now you get to not only hear him just go absolutely apeshit on tracks like I'll Remember April and Autumn Leaves and April in Paris and Where or When and things like that. Not only do you get to hear him just dance around these melodies and add so much in the way of ornamentation and things like that to them, but you get to hear how the audience responds. And that's one of the most enjoyable parts of these live records, is hearing the audience respond in real time. In the more bop-oriented records, like hearing them clap after every solo, that sort of thing. And you don't get that as much here necessarily, because this is not bop music in the traditional sense, but you still get to hear like the awe and the screaming and things like that afterwards. And it's so satisfying. it's so satisfying hearing that appreciation, and even just talking about it now, thinking about how Garner is not a forgotten pianist by any means, I wouldn't say, but not someone who is held as like a household name by any means either. And so getting to hear that rapturous acclaim for a guy who in this day and age doesn't really receive it, it's pretty affecting. It's pretty brilliant. It's pretty cool. And I don't have a whole lot else to say. Again, it's the full package of Garner in one set. There's a complete version of Concert by the Sea that you can get out there that has like even more recordings from this concert, I think. But yeah, outstanding stuff. Errol Garner, Concert by the Sea, my number 3, must listen. Check it out. At number 2, I have the self-titled record by Sarah Vaughan, released on MRC. And one last time in this video, we are going to play the game of, is Clifford Brown on this record? And answer the question with yes. Of course he is. Clifford Brown is everywhere in this day and age. Yeah, one of the most important, I think, vocal jazz albums to ever come out. Sarah Vaughan, I've mentioned her in these videos before in passing, but I don't think there's ever going to be a better opportunity to describe just how remarkable of a vocalist she was. And this is very much, I think, her magnum opus in that sense. Vaughan, I don't think compares neatly to any other vocalist from the era, I would say. But she has characteristics of some of them. Like, she has an Ella Fitzgerald type of sensibility to how she approaches singing, how she utilizes scat singing and things like that. But I don't think their voices sound alike. Vaughan has a lot more natural warmth to her voice. And sometimes it can break a little bit as well in a Billie Holiday adjacent way, perhaps, that I think is also very affecting. And you, I think, rarely get to hear Vaughan in a more jazz-friendly environment than in the lineup that's here, with Clifford Brown, with Paul Quinchette, with Herbie Mann, with Roy Haynes on the drums. Rest in peace, Roy Haynes recently departed. Just sensational stuff. I think that the opening track, Lullaby of Birdland, is one of her defining performances, if not the defining performance of her career. Again, just, it's all about her phrasing in her solos and how much she kind of dances around everything. There's a lot of scat singing and things like that here, where she's kind of going back and forth with the different instrumentalists. And again, it is peak vocal jazz. It is peak using the voice as an instrument in a jazz context, and understanding how to improvise and understanding how to dance around a melody. And it's sublime stuff. And yeah, I would argue the record peaks with its first track, but it's not like it's a really much of a step down in quality ever at all. April in Paris is really terrific and affecting. He's My Guy is excellent. September Song, of course. I'm Glad There Is You has some really great vibrato on it. It's a phenomenal ensemble, phenomenal vocalist, great selection of songs too. And again, rarely do I think we get to hear Vaughan in this type of setting. It's not like an Ella Fitzgerald situation with Vaughan's career, where like Fitzgerald had a lot of albums that like put her in the best possible place to shine. Vaughan doesn't get quite as many opportunities, at least from my understanding and experience of her career. And I hope that I'm wrong about that. And I hope that we get to talk about Sarah Vaughan a lot more in these videos, because I have so much respect for her as a singer. But this is a titanic achievement. It's a ridiculously good record. And were it not for one other album that happened to come out in 1955, I would have no qualm saying this is the best record of the year. As it is, it's my number 2, but it's essential listening if you haven't heard it. Put some respect on Sarah Vaughan's name, because she deserves it. And at number 1, which might not be that surprising, I don't know, I have Frank Sinatra with In the Wee Small Hours, released on Capitol. Sensational album, just sensational. And it's interesting because sometimes I think the claims that people make about In the Wee Small Hours as a record are a little bit overstated. People saying that it's the first concept album. I think that's a little bit difficult to define. Because if we're talking about concept albums, I mean, we've had like themed records and that type of idea going all the way back to the 1930s. Just look up like Woody Guthrie Dust Bowl ballads to find probably not even the first example of that. And it was something that pop music crooners were doing for a while. I mean, Bing Crosby has a lot of themed records from the 1940s and things like that. The only difference is that they're not LPs. And that's the distinction here. This is Sinatra taking the LP format and really just pushing for a high level of quality here. I think maybe that's the takeaway more than anything else is, Sinatra is not just pushing for a consistent theme that a lot of other artists have done at this point. He's also really just pushing for consistent quality. He's not trying to make it be just a collection of singles or putting it where it's like there's a lot of attention paid to 4 or 5 songs and then everything else is a little bit more slapdash. No, every single song is thoughtfully, mindfully orchestrated and arranged, and Sinatra puts a lot of attention into his craft. And you can hear it. I mean, the vibe of this record is so striking, I think, from the beginning, and striking in its intimacy. It's not as intimate as Julie London, but, In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning is pretty quiet as an opening track. It's not the same type of massive ensemble that you hear on even some of Sinatra's previous Capitol records. That kind of celeste part at the beginning, I think, is, again, it's one of the most obviously dynamic parts of the recording. It's really the only part that it feels like it actually competes with Frank. Otherwise, everything else is very kept in the background. But then over the course of the record, you have Nelson Riddle's arrangements that just kind of move and provide a lot of dynamics and a lot of energy at points. And then at other points, again, strip themselves back, like on Ill Wind, for instance. So many superb songs. I love Sinatra's work on Mood Indigo here. One of my favorite versions of that song. I just love the phrasing and kind of the kind of recapitulation, I suppose, in the second half of the song. It's so, so brilliant. Glad to Be Unhappy, Deep in a Dream, both excellent. Can't We Be Friends? Last Night When We Were Young is like, that's one of the more bombastic tracks on here, and it's as viscerally intense as anything that he's put out in quite some time. And again, it works. You hear the words like tone painting thrown around with this record, and I think it makes sense because there's so much color in these arrangements, and so, again, much attention to detail, and so much credit needs to be given to Nelson Riddle as an arranger for what he's able to do here. And again, I talked about this in my Nat King Cole video, and you can hear Riddle doing some of these things with Cole in previous records from earlier in the 50s, but with Sinatra and with a singer who at this point is so, personally forlorn in a lot of ways, even if he's at a career high point in other ways, and who, as an interpreter of songs, is so willing to get down to the depths in a way that other singers are not, it could not be more of a perfect matchup. All of that is to say that In the Wee Small Hours is like the cliched first great album that you hear about in books and articles and things like that. And to the point where I think people have reacted a little bit negatively to it in some contexts, perhaps. And I do not think that In the Wee Small Hours is the first great album. Go check my other videos from other years in the 1950s to see just how bullshit of a claim I think that is. But there's no doubt in my mind that this is absolutely transcendent. It's a superb album, one of the best of the 1950s for sure. And that even if maybe you could argue it doesn't deserve literally every single accolade that it gets, I still think this record deserves nothing but praise. It's pitch perfect, it's superb, and it's one of those records that you do have to be in the right mood, whether that's physically, in the right physical environment, or just mentally or emotionally. Like, you have to be in the right mood, because it's incredible how potent these songs in this context can still be 70 years later. And we are just over the 70-year, just past the 70-year anniversary of this record, too. So it's remarkable that music made 70 years ago can still be as emotionally impactful as this, but here we are. Frank Sinatra, In the Wee Small Hours, couldn't really be anything else but my number one in this list. All right, and that is it. So let me know in the comments what your favorite albums from 1955 are. What records did I miss on my list that you think I should have heard or that you think I should have just included? Again, you can go to my YouTube channel, go look at the shorts, and I have reviews for every single album that I listened to in 1955. 1956 incoming, of course, we'll have over 100 records to listen to for that year, so gonna get cracking on those sooner rather than later for sure. But let me know what you think. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more videos are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Word of mouth really means a lot. Also, we're active on social media a lot more than we used to be. So Instagram, TikTok, people who are on there, go ahead and shout me out on those platforms. I also post my individual short form reviews there as well. So it's been really cool to see people start to follow along there as well. So word of mouth really helps. If you know anyone who likes this era or just likes talking about music in general, who really loves this sort of thing, tell them about this channel and they might find it interesting. And yeah, with that, thanks a lot. And I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.